to the IATEFL plenary webinar with Dr. Willy A Renandya, entitled "Do Good Readers Make Good Writers?" Unfortunately, Dr. Renandya was unable to join us in person at the Belfast conference, so we're delighted that he's able to share his plenary with us today in this webinar. Dr. Renandya will talk for around 40 minutes, and then there will be some time for Q&A. Please post any questions that you have through the talk in either the Q&A box or the chat box, and I will collect these to present to Dr. Renandya at the end of the talk. The webinar is being recorded and will be emailed to all Belfast conference delegates next week. After that, it will be available to all IATEFL members in the My Resources part of the IATEFL website. So without further ado, it's with great pleasure that I would like to introduce you to Dr. Willy Renandya. Dr. Renandya is a language teacher educator with extensive teaching experience in Asia. He currently teaches applied linguistic courses at the National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. He is a frequent speaker at international ELT conferences and has published extensively in the area of second language education. His publications include Language Teaching Methodology, an Anthology of Current Practice, and Student-Centered Cooperative Learning. He maintains a large teacher professional development forum called Teachers' Voices. He has a website called Willy's Corner, ELT Corner, and a full list of his publications can be found on Google Scholar. And we will put links to all of those resources on the IATEFL website. So without further ado, over to you, Willy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah, for the kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on a Saturday morning. It's Saturday afternoon here in Singapore. Today I'm going to share with you a few things about how we can help our students to become good readers and also to become good writers. For many years, I've been thinking about this question. I am actually a reading person. My research and teaching interests are mainly in the area of reading. And when I give a workshop to teachers, when I teach my students in Singapore, I always make a case that reading is very important, that reading is connected to writing, that reading can help students develop their writing skills. But every time I say that reading and writing are connected, that reading can lead to good writing, there are always teachers who ask me questions like, is that really true? How come I have students who are good readers, but they're not good writers? And that gives me a lot of opportunity to think and to find out why some good readers are not good writers. And that is when I came across this book written by Alan Hirvela from Ohio State University, looking at the connection between reading and writing. And I was so inspired by his discussion, by his way of discussing the potential connection between reading and writing and how the connection can be strengthened together to help our students become good readers and good writers. So I looked at the book very carefully. And today's presentation basically is inspired by the book and by the ideas from Alan Hirvela from Ohio State University. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to share with you 3 points. Number one, I want to examine more closely the relationship between reading and writing. And then point number two, I want to look at the reasons why writing is difficult, not only for you, not only for teachers, but also for students from different places in the world. It doesn't matter whether they're native speakers or non-native speakers, writing is often seen as a very challenging, a very difficult skill to acquire. And the last part of my presentation, I'll be providing some suggestions on how reading and writing can be brought closer together so that teachers, when we teach writing, we can use reading as a springboard to developing students' writing ability. Let me begin with the first one. The first one is fairly straightforward. I'm sure you'll agree with me about the connection between reading and writing. I think we know intuitively, and also from research that we have seen, that reading and writing are connected. Some have suggested that they're actually two sides of the same coin, with the reader on one side and the writer on the other side. Now, the problem is, I think, Sarah, you will agree with me, the problem is that they are not always looking at each other. So that is the problem. So today we are going to help the readers to look at what the writers are doing so that they can learn from the text that they are reading. Because a piece of text is produced by a writer. If you look at what the writer actually did in order to produce that piece of writing, I think chances are higher that the students may just be able to use what they have learned from their reading as a basis for developing their writing skills or their writing ability. Now, here is a few more things that I've learned from reading, ideas from other people, other researchers. I think nobody would disagree that, if students can't read, they also can't write. I think that is an obvious thing that you may have noticed. You will also agree that good writers are usually good readers. No issue there. There may be one or two exceptions, but generally 99% of the time, good writers are usually good readers as well. Now, this is where the problem is. The problem lies. Are good readers good writers? The answer is yes, but not always. Again, I've seen good readers, and I've heard teachers expressing their concerns to me. I've got this group of students who are good readers, but they continue to have difficulty when they try to put their ideas in writing. Now, here are some of the reasons why, the differences between reading and writing. Yes, there are two sides of the same coin, but each one requires different set of mental processes, if you like, or mental processing. Reading is essentially comprehending. It's a meaning-focused activity. Reading is about appreciating a piece of text in terms of its content. Psycholinguistically speaking, reading largely involves semantic processing. What about writing? Writing is constructing. Writing is creating text. And writing, people have suggested, requires a lot more syntactic processing. I'm sure you have heard of Meryl Swain from Canada. I think many years ago, she suggested that input processing alone is not enough. I think students will have to be given opportunities to construct, to create text, and to be engaged in syntactic processing. Syntactic processing essentially means that it's not enough for you to just pay attention to the meaning that you want to get across, but you need to have the ability to turn this meaning, these ideas, into words, into sentences, into text. That kind of syntactic processing is usually the source of difficulties, the sort of problems that many of our students have. So in other words, I think we can tell very clearly that reading is most likely easier than writing. Writing is harder than reading. Yeah? So the answer again is obvious, that reading is a lot more fun to do. Reading is comprehending, appreciating. Writing is producing, creating text, and it can be very challenging, cognitively speaking. Now, here is some data. I'm sure that you are very familiar with the IELTS data. I am quite familiar with the IELTS data because every year I process the applications of international students from other countries who want to come and study their postgraduate studies in my university. And typically what I see is this. The total average score is 7.0, which according to the university regulation, we should accept these students. But actually, if you look at the individual scores very carefully, then you'll find that their writing score is not up to standard. And that is often the basis for rejection. of not accepting the students to be studying, simply because graduate studies require that the students do a lot of writing. The assignment that they have to do requires that they engage in academic writing activities. And if their writing score is not up to standard, then they will face a lot of difficulties when they study in English medium instruction in Singapore. The next part of my presentation, I'll be sharing with you, I'll be working with you, trying to figure out why writing is difficult. I think intuitively, as a language teacher, you know that writing is hard, that writing is difficult, that writing can be frustratingly difficult for our students, especially those who are, still at the early stage of learning a new language, learning English as a foreign language in particular. They find writing particularly difficult. Here are some of the reasons which I think deserves our attention. Number one, unlike speech, writing is context independent. Not completely context independent, but compared to speaking, writing is context independent. In a face-to-face, in a speaking context, I think you can make use of a lot of contextual clues, a lot of body language. You don't even have to say everything to the person you are talking to. Yeah, a lot of it can be understood, can be inferred through, by understanding the contextual information. But in writing, that is not the case. Writing is said to be context independent. And that means you have to say almost everything. I say almost everything. Otherwise, the audience who is not in front of you may misinterpret what you're trying to say in your writing, may not understand you fully. The next point, again, many of you are familiar with this, that writing is usually requires a very rigid structure and also very rigid organization. You have to do your writing in a certain way. In speech, you can go back and forth. You don't have to worry about paragraphing, for example, but in writing, you have to be aware that ideas are supposed to be presented in good sentences, put together in a nice paragraph before you move on to the next paragraph, and so on and so forth. In writing, you need to provide your readers with guidance, if you like, with text signals, because you want to make sure that the readers can follow your arguments, can follow your train of thoughts. So conjunctions are used, discourse markers are used in order to make your text more coherent and make your text easier for the readers to understand. In speech, we use a little bit of text signals, but not very extensive, unlike in writing. Another point that is worth highlighting is this, that the kind of language that we use in writing tend to be more formal and tend to be more standard. So casual words like look at, which is very common in speech, usually is not used that often in writing. Instead of look at, we use the word examine, the word explore, the word discuss, the word investigate, and things like that. So instead of put up, for example, we use tolerate. I think you know what I mean. It doesn't mean that we don't know the word examine. It doesn't mean that we don't know the word tolerate. It's just that these words we don't use very often in daily conversation, in social conversations and things like that. But students are expected to use these words when they put their writing together. Additionally, in writing, we tend to use longer and more complex sentences. In speech, the sentences tend to be shorter, to be less formal. Ideas are usually put together using very simple conjunctions like and, but afterwards, and, but afterwards. But in writing, I think we tend to use more complex embedded clauses and things like that. In academic writing, school type of writing, students have to worry about the content and also the language and also the organization. And that makes the whole process of writing becomes extremely difficult. It's slow, it's painfully laborious and mentally taxing as well. So ladies and gentlemen, writing is hard. writing is difficult for our students. The question then is, what can we do to support our student writers? Teach them more sentence grammar. We can do that, and we've tried that for many, many years. Teach them more text grammar, because students are expected to produce a piece of text. Then we need to also teach them the grammar of text. Should we be doing this? The answer is yes, but we've been doing this for many, many years, and students continue to have difficulty in their writing. Give them more writing practice, not a bad idea, but this is part of the solution to the problems, to helping students to develop their writing skills in the long run. So I have shared with you the connection between reading and writing, the first part of my presentation, and the second part is, focusing on why writing is difficult. I'm now about ready to come to the next part of my presentation, which is this one. Essentially, this is the most important part of my presentation. I'll be sharing with you some ideas on how we can help our students to use reading as a springboard to developing their writing skills. For that, I think the first thing we need to do is to have a theory of learning, a model of learning that we can make use of, that we can use as a basis for developing the instructional strategies or instructional procedures that we'll be using in our teaching. And one such model, it's very simple, it's very interesting to me as well. It has a lot of ecological validity because it's the kind of model that we have seen being used in our daily life. It's known as the apprenticeship model of skill learning. Essentially, what it means is that if you want to learn to become a chef, for example, the best thing for you to do is to learn from the master chef. If you want to become a world-class painter, for example, the best thing for you will be to stay with them and learn from the master, him or herself. The apprenticeship model is very interesting, and it has 4 stages, or it involves 4 stages. The first stage is modeling. An apprentice, the first few months or the first year or 2, what they have to do is to just see the model, the way the masters are doing it. So there's a lot of watching, there's a lot of observing, there's a lot of reading, if you like. And then the second bit is imitating. The apprentice is trying to do the best they can in order to copy, in order to imitate what the master is doing. And then the next stage is approximating through trial and error. The apprentice is doing things on their own, pretty much with some help from the master, until eventually they're able to create their own craft, whether it's cooking, whether it's painting, whether it's sculpting, and things like that. So visually, this is what it looks like. Yeah. First, the apprentice is just watching, observing the master doing things, doing the cooking or doing the painting and things like that. If you look at the pictures here, then you can see that initially the master is playing a bigger role in the learning process, but gradually the master is reducing the modeling, reducing the teaching, so that the students can slowly and gradually take over. In Singapore, a lot of teachers are familiar with this model, and this is known as the gradual release of responsibility. Yeah, slowly and gradually, the students take over. But the teacher is always there. The teacher is always there, providing support, providing ongoing support to the students until eventually the students are able to create their own craft or create their own writing, so to speak. I know that some of you may be a bit worried or concerned about the word imitating. Sarah, I'm sure you're worried about copying, imitating, and plagiarizing. But imitating is a natural process. And here is a quote that I like very much from this book. Now, the guy here who wrote the book is not an applied linguist, is not an ELT expert, but his book sells in millions. Million copies of the book have been sold because the book contains lots of practical ideas about how people can write better. And this is what he says. I like the quote very much, actually. Let's look at this very carefully. Writing is learned by imitation. If anyone asks me how I learned to write, and he writes very well, I'd say I learned by reading the men and women who were doing the kind of writing that I wanted to do and trying to figure out how they did it. The whole theory of language acquisition actually is here, expressed in a very casual, non-technical language. So what he's trying to say actually is this, which to me makes a lot of sense. If you want to write like Paul Nation is one of the most well-known applied linguists. If you want to write like Jeremy Harmer, another well-known language teaching methodologist, then what do you need to do? You need to read their works. You need to see a lot of models. Makes sense, yeah? And they need to observe their writing style. It's not enough to just read their works, because if you just do the reading bit, you are engaged in semantic processing only, and that's not good enough. You need to observe their writing styles. You need to notice, you need to attend to, you need to pay attention to the way they write. And then you imitate them, not copying, but imitate their writing style. You need to continue practicing every day until eventually you develop your own style of writing. So pretty much what he says is something like this. So that is like a big, general model of how we can support our students' writing ability using a very simple model of learning known as the apprenticeship model of skill learning, basically. I am now going to share with you pathways, 4 pathways to bridging the reading-writing gap. The first pathway is known as this, that students should be encouraged to read like a reader. And then step number 2, we should encourage the students to read like a writer so that they can pay attention. They can notice the kind of language, the kind of features that are typical of that piece of writing. The next one is to write like a reader. And finally, to write like a writer. And I'm going to be discussing this one at a time. Yeah. First one. Reading like a reader. What do readers do? Readers read for meaning. I think that is obvious. Mostly they're engaged in semantic processing, and they read for information. They read for different purposes. They read for enjoyment. They read for recreation, but they also read a lot. I think that is a key thing. They read a lot. They don't read just in order to be able to answer reading comprehension questions by the teachers, but they go beyond what is available in the classroom. They find reading materials that they find enjoyable, and they continue reading outside the classroom. Readers also, or good readers, read different types of texts because they know that different texts are created differently for different purposes, for different audiences. The next one is that readers also read about 20 to 30 minutes a day or even longer. You may be asking, what are some of the benefits of daily reading? Yeah, reading frequently, reading every day, reading 20 or 30 minutes a day. What are the language learning or cognitive benefits of reading? Now, this is what I've learned from the literature. There is the linguistic benefit, the cognitive benefit, and also the affective benefit. Yeah, first one first. The linguistic benefit is obvious. I think we should not underestimate this, that reading is a great source of students' language development, vocabulary knowledge in particular. Reading is also a great source of students' grammatical knowledge, and reading is also a great source of students' knowledge of different text types and different text structures. So the linguistic benefit has been ascertained in the literature, has been confirmed again and again. Students who read a great deal have a wider vocabulary. They also have more sophisticated grammatical knowledge and also discourse organizations or text structures. Secondly, another important benefit is that students who read a great deal, or those of you who read a great deal, have a lot more knowledge, wider, vast knowledge of the world, knowledge about places, knowledge about cultures, knowledge about history, knowledge about the political system, knowledge about the financial system, and many other things. And we do know that word knowledge and world knowledge helps students become, more able to think more critically, to be able to answer comprehension questions as well, and to become more discerning in their reading. Now, good readers who enjoy reading a great deal also have been reported that they develop, a more positive attitudes towards learning the language. Their motivation to learning English also increases a great deal. So these are three major benefits of reading. And we have to have this in place before we move on to the next step. The next step or the next stage, before I move on to the next stage, let me share with you a quote from Stephen Krashen that looks at that examines the connection between reading and writing. Let me read this slowly to you. When enough reading is done, the key word here is enough reading is done, all the necessary grammatical structures and discourse rules for writing will be automatically presented to the writer in sufficient quantity. So according to Krashen, reading alone is enough because students will have seen, a lot of examples, a lot of instances of how words are used, and a lot of grammatical structures and discourse rules that are available in the text. Well, I know that some of you may not be a big fan of Stephen Krashen, but it's really, encouraging, at least for me, when I saw a recent article that was published in a big journal in our field, Foreign Language Annals, by two well-known second language acquisition scholars. And these two scholars actually examined very carefully Krashen's input hypothesis theory. The conclusion, the theory still is around, is well and alive, and the theory is still applicable in many situations, in particular when it comes to providing students with a lot of exposure to the language. Reading, the input hypothesis through reading is probably one of the best ways that we can provide students with that kind of environment. Maybe you want to hear from a teacher, a practitioner, about the benefits of reading. And here is one example from a teacher whom I met personally from Vietnam some years back. She spoke really, really well. She wrote really, really well. And this is what she says to me. Reading makes reading easier. I think that's true. And also, more importantly, reading makes writing easier as well. And she took the IELTS test after we had our conversation, and her IELTS score was 8.5, almost perfect score. And she attributed her excellent, scores on the fact that she spent a lot of time doing a lot of pleasure, recreational reading when she was in secondary school in Vietnam. The second step is this: read like a writer. So the first one is read like a reader, and reader does a lot of reading basically. Yeah, readers read for meaning essentially. The second bit is read like a writer, also known as writerly reading. Now, this is where the reader will have to stop and think a little bit and try to understand how or why a piece of writing is produced. By understanding what is the purpose of this piece of writing and who is the audience, who is this essay for, what is the context, and more importantly, perhaps, what are some of the language features Yeah. If the readers start thinking about this, I think they will be able to start noticing some of the important features of a text. Yeah, so you are reading as if you are planning to write the next day or the week after or the following week. Now here is an example. Yeah, a piece of recount, for example, is a text type known as recount. I think a recount is written for a specific purpose and usually for a specific audience, and it has certain ways, certain organizational structure as well. The words are, some of the typical words found in recounts include, yesterday I was doing something, when, the present past continuous plus the present tense. Some action words are also used very often. Some direct speech or indirect speech is used in this kind of writing. Yeah. So the student's job and the teacher's job actually is to guide the students to pay attention to some of the features. The same thing with the different types of writing known as exposition. So the teacher's job is to highlight some of the important features of this kind of text. What is the purpose of this kind of text? Who is the audience? And what kind of typical language structures and organizations are usually present in this kind of text? The key word, again, is focus noticing. I don't think we need to teach every single piece of rules and conventions that govern this type of writing. Yeah, remember that the students will have seen this kind of writing many, many times in the first step. So the second step is for us to engage students in more focused noticing of the language features, of the text types, of the organizational structure. Yeah, if you are teaching students who want to be able to write a journal article, for example, then you may want to draw their attention to how, for example, the abstract of an article is usually written. Yeah, this is a typical structure of an abstract. Yeah, it usually begins with general background and specific background and the gap that the researcher is trying to address, followed by a discussion on research methodology, brief one-sentence result, and also implications. Very typical. Writing an abstract may be very easy for those of you who have been doing this, but it may not be very easy for students who are still learning how to use the language. And surprise, surprise, when you start noticing, when you start asking students to notice the language features, they may find that, hey, certain expressions, certain words, certain sentences are used again and again by researchers, by writers. Now, these are some instances that I took from an academic phrase bank. It's a database from Manchester University, very useful for students. Yeah, so these are just instances. Now, what you need to do is to get the students to pay attention. Look, these are typical sentences. Researchers are not the most creative people. They tend to use the same expressions, the same phrases, the same sentences. Yeah, here are other additional examples. Okay, so the key thing about step number 2 is that we want to provide students with the opportunity to do focused noticing of the way a text is written, of the purpose of the text, of the audience of the text, and also of the way information is presented, and also the kind of language features that are typically found in the kind of writing that the students are targeting. The next one is write like a reader. When the students start writing their first draft, for example, essentially they are writing without any specific readers in mind. They are writing for themselves. So this is where we need to provide students with some instruction on how they should become more aware of the audience of their writing and also the purpose of their writing. We should also be telling our students that the first draft, whatever first draft that they produce, is likely to be of poor quality. It's horrible. It's not reader-friendly. The style is not very good. The language is full of mistakes, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of coherence problem as well. Yeah, I think this is something that we need to keep reminding to our students, that when they write with a reader in mind. And this is where the justification for rewriting, for revising becomes something that makes sense from the student's point of view. So writing is actually revising. Students, we need to revise the first draft, and the teachers provide comments on the first draft. The students rewrite their first draft and produce the second draft, and so on. And they keep revising. Yeah. So again, the key point here is that the students need to write for a real audience, not just for the teachers. So step number 3 basically is writing with a greater awareness of the audience, because writing is such a difficult process. And it's very likely that your first draft is likely to be very, very bad. Yeah. And the moment you have somebody to read your first draft, then you understand that your first draft is not very comprehensible. Your first draft is difficult to read and understand. Finally, step number 4 is write like a writer. What do writers do? Real writers, they write every day. Yeah, they write a variety of texts for different purposes and for different audiences. They write emails, they write blogs, they write social media posts, they write poems, they write academic papers, all kinds of writings that they have to do. And that is what good writers do. I know it's not easy to get the students to enjoy writing, but slowly and gradually, if you give them a lot of model, if you can help the students see the importance of writing for their academic achievement, for their academic purposes, I think they will understand that writing involves a lot of rewriting, that writing involves a lot of practice in writing. So to become a better writer, the students simply have to write more often. Yeah. Step number 1 is write. Step number 2 is write more. Step number 3 is write even more. And it continues like that. There's no other way. Yeah. Students or people learn writing best by writing, and there's no other way for that. Gradually, the students' writing will become much better. Their language will become more accurate. They'll become more fluent, and they'll be able to use a wider range of language in their writing, and they'll be able to write with greater clarity and with greater coherence as well. And if they do it right, there's an added bonus. They will find writing finally joyful. Yeah, those of you in the audience, if you've been doing a lot of writing, I think you will find that writing is or can be enjoyable or can be joyful. So these are the 4 pathways to building a stronger connection between reading and writing. Step number 1 is read like a reader. I think step number 2 is very important. Read like a writer. Step number 3, write like a reader. And step number 4 is write like a writer. Just give me 1 or 2 minutes to conclude my presentation today. Some implications and some conclusions here. Number 1, I think we need to try the best we can to help the students see the connection between reading and writing more clearly. Yeah, the 4 pathways that I've just shared with you is basically an attempt to build a closer, stronger link between reading and writing. Point number 2, we should provide students with more opportunities to learn from texts before they write. I think we have not done this enough. Provide students with more opportunities to learn from texts before they write. Typically, in a writing classroom, we may probably provide 1 single model, or maybe 2. If we give students more models, I think the fear is that the students will just copy everything from the model. Yeah. Initially, that's what is likely to happen, but gradually, I think the students will be able to see that, models are models. They should be using the models to help them improve on their writing. Here is a practical example. If you ask me, if you are teaching students how to write a job application letter, I think we need to provide not just 1, not 2, maybe 10 model text may be needed for the students to really understand what a job application letter actually looks like. And another point that I've mentioned again and again is we need to engage students in focused noticing of text features. Let me say this again very carefully. I think in the past, many of us have been spending a lot of time doing a lot of explicit and systematic teaching of writing. I think we should try a different approach here. I don't think we need to teach students everything about writing. That will be basically impossible. What we can do is to provide students with a lot of examples, a lot of model text, and then engage students in focused noticing of the text features and text organizations. The next point is obvious. Encourage students to read and write more. There's nothing like reading more and writing more to help the students become better readers and to help the students become better writers. Yeah, people learn to read and write by reading and writing. And that is the end of my presentation. But I will end with a small gift for you. This is from my website, and all these books are free for you to download, including the first one, where I put together my thoughts in a paper, in a book chapter, exploring the relationship between reading and writing. You just need to remember the address there, down below. It's myname.com. You will be able to find a lot of resources, a lot of free papers and journal articles to download. Thank you very much for listening. Sarah, back to you.
Thank you, Willy, and thank you for sharing that really fascinating approach with us. So we've got a number of questions for you.
Okay.
The first question is from Awad, and he asks, and this is going back to the early part of the presentation.
Yes.
To what extent do the writing difficulties vary when we write for general and or specific purposes?
Yes. The answer is yes. Because different texts are written for different purposes and different texts are written for different audiences. So the way the text is put together is different. The language is different. The words are different. The sentences are different. The organization is also different. So today, actually, the I would say the most popular approach to teaching writing is this approach called the text-based approach or genre-based approach to teaching writing. So the starting point is always a specific text type, whether it's ESB or non-ESB, a specific text type, and then focus on that text type in terms of the audience, in terms of the purpose, in terms of the text features, and all that.
Great, and thank you for that question.
Yeah.
So moving on, Monica asks, does it mean that the most effective for the modeling phase in the apprentice model might be writing in front of the students and commenting out loud on what we're doing?
It's always a good idea for the teachers to provide, feedback, right there in the classroom. And to me, actually, feedback is probably more important than the teaching that we usually do at the initial stage of learning. If you look at feedback from a different perspective, that feedback actually is an opportunity for you to reteach what you have just taught before. I think you'll be happier when you give feedback to your students. Don't look at feedback simply as correcting your students' mistakes. Feedback is a great opportunity for you to teach and reteach things that were not very clearly presented earlier on. I think we all know that the first time the students hear from us, our explanation, they forget almost immediately, if not the next day, if not the day after. So feedback is actually a great opportunity for the teachers to reteach. And reteaching is an important part of our job as a teacher.
That's great that you made that point, because there's actually another question here asking how important feedback is. So I think you answered that.
There's one question there from Benedict.
Yep.
The innate ability.
So Benedicta asks, what role does innate ability play in developing reading and writing skills?
Depends on what you mean by innate ability. Some second language scholars believe that the innate ability can be activated through providing students with a lot of language input, through students doing a lot of reading, a lot of understanding, a lot of semantic processing. One person who is well known for his theory is Stephen Krashen. In fact, I cited his work earlier on. To him, reading is enough, but you have to do a lot of reading. If you do that, then basically you will be able to, according to him, like sort of naturally, you will be able to notice, because you have seen those words, those sentences frequently in your reading, you'll be able to transfer that to writing. But some people may disagree with him, saying that some teaching is important, some focused teaching is important. And my whole presentation basically is combining the two ideas. Yes, the initial part of students receiving a lot of language is extremely important, but that is not enough, because we know from our own observation that some students continue to struggle, or many students continue to struggle, despite what they have gone through previously, doing a lot of reading. So some teaching will be important. What I don't believe is explicit, systematic teaching of the language. I think that idea has been questioned, because that idea is based on the assumption that we can actually teach language items one at a time and presented the language items sequentially and systematically according to our understanding about how people learn. That doesn't happen. Yeah, learning is not systematic. Students acquire language very often incidentally. So incidental learning or implicit learning is what makes the innate hypothesis interesting to me. I think it has some value. I think we need to continue to do that and provide students with a lot of opportunities to learn on their own, basically. We come in and we provide focused instruction, or just-in-time learning, if you like. And that, to me, is the more powerful way of learning, of acquiring language. Systematic teaching of grammar, for example, doesn't usually work very well, especially in particular in my experience teaching language in this part of the world. Places like Thailand, Indonesia, China, and so on and so forth, Japan, including Japan. I think systematic teaching is not going to help very much.
Thank you. And we've just got time for one final question from Alex.
Yes.
So Alex says, you said the genre approach is most popular these days based on a model. What is your opinion of process writing? Is it helpful?
Yes, process writing is very helpful. Genre-based writing actually includes process writing in it. Genre-based writing begins with a lot of modeling, which is what I discussed in my presentation. Genre-based model also involve a lot of, not a lot, but some teaching by the teacher about the features, about the organization of a text. Now, once the teachers have done that part, the next bit is actually for the students to start writing, and they are likely to produce the first draft, the second draft, the third draft, and so on and so forth. And that is where the process writing comes into the picture. So genre-based writing is not just focusing on the linguistic aspect, but also providing students with opportunities to write and rewrite, like in the process model of writing. So some people have come up with a nice term. It's called process genre model of writing, actually, which is a marriage between the two. But I think originally genre-based pedagogy already involves process writing, embedded in it.
That's great, thank you. So I think we'll bring the session to a close. Thank you so much, Willy. I know everybody here, judging from the comments, has found this a really enjoyable and productive webinar. So thank you again. Lots of people have asked about copies of the presentation. For those of you who were registered for the Belfast conference, a link will be sent to you within the next week. And then after that, it will be available for IATEFL members on the IATEFL website. So it just remains for me to thank everybody for coming, and we look forward to welcoming as many of you as possible to the IATEFL conference in Harrogate next year. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
I'll see you there next year, Sarah.